and welcome to another edition of Inside Outlook. I'm Jeff Havers, Superintendent of Pemberton Township Schools. First, I'd like to welcome everyone back from what I hope was an enjoyable and relaxing spring break. As we gear up for another busy spring, this week we will begin to phase in our 5-day-a-week in-person learning schedule. Parents of our pre-K through 5th grade students are reminded to check the district website for their school start dates, which are also displayed on the screen. Spring is also the time of year we present our budget to the community, and today I'm pleased to have Business Administrator Dan Smith join us to talk about the 2021-2022 budget. Welcome, Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Havers.
You prepared an abbreviated budget presentation for our viewers, so I'm going to turn it over to you to discuss our 2021-2022 budget.
Okay, thank you. So we have some slides we will go through with this presentation, and at any point, if any members of the community have questions, they can reach out to my office over at 1 Egbert Street or via email at dsmith@pem.org, and we can answer any questions that they might have. The first item we want to touch on were some important dates for us in the budgeting process. So February 25th, we received our state aid notice from the state of New Jersey, which provides us with a lot of financial information, not only for the 21-22 budget, but information that we use to project future budgets as well. March 18th, the board approved our preliminary budget, which went to the County Office of Education for review and approval. Once we receive that approval, we will advertise our budget in the newspaper. And then on April 29th, we will hold our public hearing where the board will adopt the final version of the 2021-2022 budget. On the revenue side of the budget, there are 4 areas we wanted to touch on. The update on S2, our tax levy, reserve accounts, and a revenue summary. So we've been talking about S2 for a few years now. That was enacted in 2018, and it looks at districts who are receiving adjustment aid, which is a form of state aid. And if you are receiving adjustment aid and you are spending above adequacy and you're below your local fair share, you're on track to lose that adjustment aid over a 7-year period. And for our district, when S2 was enacted, that meant a loss of $26.1 million over 7 years. Each year of S2, you lose a percentage of that overfunding, as the state would say, through the budgeting process. So in the 21-22 school year, we're slated to lose 37% of our overfunding amount. S2 looks at our state aid differential. So our state aid differential is the amount of funds that we are receiving over and above what the state has calculated as our share of state aid. So for Pemberton, we're projected to be $18.7 million overfunded for next year's budget. So if we were to lose 37% of that number, we would lose $6.9 million in the 21-22 budget. The next area of S2 looks at our adequacies budget, which adequacy looks at our spending. So how many dollars are we spending for the instruction of students? And right now we are $11.5 million over adequacy, which means we are spending more than what the state feels we should spend. If we were going to be reduced on that amount, 37% of that is $4.2 million. The last part of S2 looks at our local fair share. So local fair share is how much money the local taxpayers can contribute towards their adequacy budget. The state looks at our equalized value across the county and also our aggregate income of both the township and the borough. The one issue with this calculation is that the factors change from year to year. In S2, there is an exception that says if your local tax rate is greater than the state average tax rate, your funding is reduced based on that over adequacy amount versus your state aid differential. And if you recall, our over adequacy amount was much lower than our state aid differential. So if we are going to lose state aid, we want to stay in that right-hand column of the over adequacy. In the first 4 years of S2, 21-22 being year 4, we've lost just slightly over $11 million in state aid. In the final 3 years of S2, we could lose anywhere from $15 million to $7 million. If we cut based on our state aid differential, we're looking at possibly $15 million. If we're cut based on over adequacy, we're looking at possibly $7 million. So we don't want to cut any state aid. We don't want to make reductions to the budget. But if we are going to get our state aid reduced, we want to stay in an over adequacy column. And again, being in that over adequacy column means that our local tax rate exceeds the state average. The next item we wanted to talk about is the tax levy. So a couple of years ago, the board developed a plan to increase the tax levy every year until we reached our local fair share at the end of S2. We are maintaining a 9% increase in the proposed budget for the tax levy. Our district is an SDA district or former Abbott district. S2 allows us to reach our local fair share in 1 year. For Pemberton, that would equate to a 37% increase in the tax levy in the 21-22 budget.
Now, of course, Mr. Smith, we have talked about this. There's no way we would propose raising taxes at 37%. But I know that you and I have heard other people come at us and say that stop complaining about S2 cuts because you're not at your local fair share.
Correct. And that is true. And several meetings we've had with state officials and county officials, even with other school districts, that point always comes up that, yeah, you're losing your adjustment aid, but you're not paying your fair share in property taxes that should be going to your budget to make up for that aid that you're losing.
Right. So this plan that the board put in place is a reasonable plan to get the local fair share, which we need to do, but we're not going to do it overnight. That's too much of a burden on a community.
Correct. So we are on a projection now to reach our local fair share in 2025-2026 school year, which would be the first year out of S2. Yes. So a 9% increase in the tax levy for the 21-22 budget equates to approximately $157 annual increase in taxes for a township resident with an average assessment of $164,000. In the borough, where the average assessment is $184,000, that equates to about a $193 increase annually in school tax. The next area of the budget we wanted to touch on is our reserve accounts. So our reserve accounts act as savings accounts for our budget. So we have our capital reserve account. Once funds are deposited into that account, those funds can only be withdrawn for capital projects. So those funds and those projects have no effect on the general fund or the tax levy. Money that comes out of the reserve is used only for capital projects. In next year's budget, we're withdrawing $2.8 million from that reserve account to complete capital projects over the summer. We also have a maintenance reserve account, and those funds can only be pulled out and used to fund our maintenance budget. So in next year's budget, we are withdrawing $500,000 from our maintenance reserve account that will help fund the maintenance budget. The last reserve account that we are accessing in next year's budget is our impact aid reserve. So we will be pulling $1.7 million out of our impact aid reserve and putting that into our 21-22 budget. A portion of that withdrawal will fund our Chromebook purchases for next year. And we'll also fund a portion of the general fund for general appropriations. We are displaying a revenue summary that we have to take a closer look at. So on paper, it looks like our revenue is only going down $374,000, which would not be a drastic change across the district. But if we dive deeper into that summary, we see our general fund went down by $1.1 million. Our change in reserves is $2.8 million. And we have to exclude that from our calculation because, as we said earlier, those reserve funds have no effect on the general fund or the tax levy. This year for 21-22, the state of New Jersey changed the calculation used to contribute funds from the general fund to the preschool program. So some of you may be aware our preschool program is fully funded by the state through state aid. However, the state does not pay for self-contained preschool expenses and also inclusionary preschool expenses. So those expenses are covered by the general fund in the form of a transfer going from the general fund to the special revenue fund. When we look at all those factors combined, we're actually looking at a reduction of $4.3 million. So when we were balancing the budget for 21-22, we set our revenues up and we had to move over to the appropriations side and make reductions totaling $4.3 million. And when we presented those reductions, we presented them in three different areas. First was by type. And of the $4.3 million, $2.9 million in reductions is related to salary and benefits. So 85% of our overall budget is salary and benefits. We are a very labor intensive industry, and we have been reducing our budget for the last few years. Cutting $11 million over 4 years is a hard task. So we're at a point now where we've reduced a lot of our non-salary costs, kind of as low as they can go, and we're looking at reductions in salaries and benefits. Within that $2.9 million in salaries and benefits, we have our personnel reductions, and we listed them in 4 different groups. The first is attrition. So attrition cuts would be any position that would be vacant on July 1st that we will not fill. So it could be a staff member's retiring June 30th, and we're not going to replace that position on July 1st. It could be a current vacant position where someone left mid-year for various reasons, and then on July 1st, we're not going to fill that position. We also have some reallocation where we're taking some positions that are funded through the general fund and moving them over to the special revenue or grant funds. We have non-renewals in our FTE reductions, and we also have our last category, which would be job loss. So it's been the initiative of the administration to keep that job loss number as low as possible. So the job loss number represents staff members who are currently employed with the district, but as of July 1st, their positions will be cut.
Right, Mr. Smith, and I see that the number there is 30, and we need to keep in mind, as you know, that we cut about 28 jobs last year, 24 jobs the year before, and our goal really truly is to not have to cut anybody. So we are using attrition the best we can, but obviously we can't always use all attrition. And one of my least favorite sayings when there's budget cuts is, oh, we're going to have to do more with less. And that just is not accurate. We actually are we're stuck with less people who now have to do more to try to maintain and keep the services for our kids. And we're into some difficult times, and they're going to become more difficult as years go forward, because obviously there's a great impact when you cut 24, 28, 30 jobs in a matter of 3 years, and we're looking to have to cut more in the future. So again, we're going to have less people, and those people left behind, and those people that are still working, we're all going to have to work harder to try to maintain the services for our kids who need us.
Correct, and we've also tried to maintain equity through our reductions by reducing every aspect of the district budget. So every department had budget reductions. Some had more than others. Our highest 4 reductions came from our elementary department curriculum, our undistributed, which would be health benefits, insurance, utilities, things like that, and our secondary budget. But as we said, excuse me, all aspects of the district were reviewed. All aspects of the district were reduced. And this is really from the top to the bottom. Every department within the district is having some sort of reduction in the 21-22 budget. As far as new appropriations, we really don't have any next year's budget. We do have some capital projects. We mentioned earlier that $2.8 million coming from the capital reserve account. That will be used to fund a bus garage paving project, a new well house at the Pemberton Township High School, roof repairs and replacements at the Pemberton Township High School, and also the completion of a parking lot at the Fort Dix Elementary School. As far as academics, we had to reduce our summer programs based on budget reductions, but with the infusion of federal dollars into our budget, we're able to offer summer programs this summer for the learning loss and acceleration of learning. We are doing a one-to-one device refresh at the elementary level, and we will be able to offer student tutoring in next year's budget, again, based on federal money that we have received.
Mr. Smith, I want to highlight a point you just raised, and that is the fact that we had to cut all the summer programs that we usually offer at Pemberton. We also had to cut after-school tutoring out of our local budget. Sadly, that means things like Cupcake Wars, band, musical theater. We're not going to be able to offer that. We will be able to offer academic enrichment programs in the summer, but that's only because we're able to use federal dollars. And we can use those federal dollars this summer and the following 2 summers after this. We also can use federal dollars for after-school tutoring, but again, we're not using our local money. We had to cut that, but we are fortunate enough to get the federal dollars and use that for our summer programs and after-school tutoring.
Correct. And we'll get to more on that in 1 second. I just want to mention again, our public budget hearing will be April 29th at the Pemberton Township High School. Again, that's where the board will approve the final version of the 2021-2022 budget. And then the last item I wanted to touch on to piggyback what Mr. Havers was just talking about is we do have federal funds coming into the budget. So we're receiving $3.1 million in ESSER 2 funding, which that's split into three categories. So the first is to address learning loss. The second is to address mental health of students and staff. And then the last is for reopening of schools in September. So that third chunk of money can be used for HVAC projects, PPE, whatever the district feels is needed to have a building open and ready for students for September. Also part of the American Recovery Act, which was recently approved, the district is in line to potentially receive $6 million for funds split into those same three categories: learning loss, mental health, and reopening of schools. While we haven't received final guidance from the New Jersey Department of Education as to specific items the funds can be spent on, we are in the planning stages of creating budgets for those two funding streams so that we can start utilizing those funds as soon as possible.
Yes, and Mr. Smith, it's great. It's very exciting to receive this extra money from the federal government, almost $10 million total, and it's very exciting. And you know, there's a lot of talk about, well, this can you hire new people and it can save jobs, but we've already been told by the county office that we should be very careful in terms of recurring costs and paying things like salaries. We probably will need to put some salaries into that to help out our students, but we're going to have to be very careful. The other challenge we have as an SDA district is that the SDA is supposed to pay for our necessary repairs, our emerging projects at our schools. And we know we have needed repairs at Byzanski, at the high school, at Helen Ford, at Newcomb. There are schools that really do have projects that need to be completed, probably somewhere close to $50–60 million total. Right now, the SDA, as you know, doesn't have any money, and we're actually involved in a lawsuit with the great schools suing the SDA so that they suing the state so they can fund the SDA so they can help take care of these projects for us. So we are really stuck right now looking at making these whatever capital improvements on our own. So for instance, if we just wanted to take care of the HVA system in the high school, that's probably $6 to $10 million by itself. So as much as we're excited to get $10 million, sadly, it gets used up very quickly.
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you very much, Mr. Smith. I'd like to remind everyone they are welcome to attend our public budget hearing, which will take place Thursday, April 29th at 6 p.m. in the high school auditorium. That's our show for today, and I look forward to seeing you on the next edition of Inside Outlook.